program, NORML Show Live, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate for the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate or encourage any illegal activity and advise all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws by visiting norml.org, NORML.org. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers of NORML Show Live are their own and do not necessarily reflect the philosophy and policies of NORML. Listener discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws presents NORML Show Live, Marijuana Nation. Now, here's your host, NORML's Outreach Coordinator, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokets. Welcome. It is Monday, March 19th, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us for our program. We're so glad you could be here to help us spread the growing truth about cannabis. We are this close to legalization in the United States of America. 2012 is going to be the year, and we're glad that you could be a part of it. Joining us from our virtual studio in Astoria, Oregon, is our senior news editor, Cannabis Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Russ.
It's just you and me today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're at, well, actually, we've got Brian here. Brian's hanging out. Brian the Red's over on the camera over there. So we do have a guest today, so I shouldn't say it's just us.
Three of us.
Just the three of us, I should say.
Nice.
Hey,
but oh, get your mic there.
That's okay. She heard me.
That's right. So Carrie brings us our hemp headlines right here after the first break. What do we have in the news today?
Well, today we've got a follow-up on a story that we've been watching for quite a while out of Colorado. And also, this is a story that just isn't going to go away. I've got another story on K2 I want to tell you about today for a Monday. And also, I'm going to tell you about a rally in Redding, California tomorrow, if you're interested in that as well.
All right, we'll get to those news stories right after this first break. And also on today's show, we have a debut of sorts. I made a call out for a Roots Monday editor, if someone had any knowledge of jazz and blues and acoustic and folk and country and all that kind of stuff that we play on Roots Monday. And I got a response back from someone who's going to go by the handle Diamond Dale Rio. So Diamond Dale Rio will be our Roots Monday editor. We'll give him a shot today and see what happens. He's bringing to us some music by a man named Melvin Chanel. I hope that's the right pronunciation. And the song is called Serial Drama, which, boy, how apropos is that given given my political life lately, which seems to be drama after drama. But we'll look forward to that coming out 20 after the hour. And then at half past, I promised everyone that I'd be bringing more video from the Baker Institute conference that I was a part of. And today we finally be able to get around to some of that video. The Reverend Edwin C. Sanders II, he's the senior servant at the Metropolitan Interdenominational Church. A little bit of a mouthful there, in Nashville, Tennessee. And he did a fantastic presentation addressing the Michelle Alexander quote about the war on drugs being the new Jim Crow. I think his voice is a very important voice in the movement, and I'm really proud to be able to bring it to you today on the show. Then in hour 2 in Toker Talk Radio, we'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. Give you a little bit of news from my trip to Seattle, give you my perspective on what's happening in legalization and more. So stick around. It's NORML Show Live.
You're listening to NORML Show Live, the voice of the Marijuana Nation.
Hi, I'm Radical Russ. One of the best things about marijuana is the wonderful aroma. But when you travel a lot like I do, that aroma becomes a suspicious smell. That's why I endorse stealth-products.com, the leaders in smell-proof containers. From smell-proof vacuum bags to smell-proof backpacks and duffel bags, all the way to smell-proof digital safes, stealth-products.com has you covered. Stealth-products.com brings you safe, secure, odorless layers of protection with activated carbon fiber. Backpacks and duffel bags are simple black so as not to attract attention with a logo or a flashy design. Now, nothing is perfectly odor controlled from the detection of drug dogs, but with proper vigilance, containers from stealth-products.com will help you avoid nosy humans.
You're now listening to Illit Beats.
Stealth-products.com. Stealth-products.com.
Yo, what's up? This is Miles from Slightly Stupid. You're listening to NORML Show Live.
Weedmaps.com. I'm Radical Russ from NORML. In my job as outreach coordinator, I travel every month, and when I'm on the road, I need a fast, accurate way to find the medical marijuana dispensaries in the area. So I turn to Weedmaps.com. Weedmaps.com has the best dispensary locator online or on your mobile device. Search by zip code or let Weedmaps find you, and in seconds you'll have the addresses, phone numbers, and customer service reviews for the medical marijuana dispensaries in the local area. Weedmaps.com also has a section devoted to helping you find a doctor who understands and recommends medical marijuana under your state's law. You can even check prices on the Medical Marijuana Stock Exchange. Coming soon, you'll even be able to find the listings of NORML attorneys and chapters, local head shops and grow shops, and the best weed-friendly businesses. Weedmaps.com has the information you need to be an informed cannabis consumer. Visit Weedmaps.com today, a proud sponsor of the NORML Network.
Inhaling deeply of the sacred smoke.
Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, consumer cannabis. It's time for this week's NORML News with Cannabis Carrie.
You've been following a medical marijuana business ban in Fort Collins, Colorado. Last election, voters in Fort Collins voted on Question 300 and ultimately ended up voting to keep medical marijuana businesses out of their community. By just 53% of the votes, they lost that election and enacted the ban and chose to close those businesses that were already established in the town of about 144,000 residents. Now, there were 92 different medical marijuana businesses in the area on election day of last year. 34 of those businesses were dispensaries. All 92 had until February 14th of last month to close up shop. Many of the business owners who have closed their doors in Fort Collins are trying to or already have established businesses in neighboring towns. Some have just thrown in the towel, and a small group have vowed that they would keep on fighting. A group of 6 dispensary owners had banded together and filed a lawsuit to seek a restraining order for enforcing the ban. The lawsuit charged that the new ordinance had violated the Colorado Constitution by impinging on the rights of business owners, on their right to assembly, their right to property, and their right to express themselves, as well as the right to participate in the political process. But as the reality of a costly court case is now being laid out before the group of former dispensary owners and their attorney who represents all of them, Brett Barney, he said that the case was on hold at this moment and would most likely be withdrawn in the next week. He said that the owners were discussing the expense of continuing a long court battle that would be very difficult to win. Barney said that he has advised his clients that they would most likely not get the justice they are seeking from the courts. They had tried to delay the ban, saying that they would suffer irreparable harm through the city's enforcement of such a ban, arguing that they had followed all city and state regulations to set up their businesses, incurring significant expenses, only to be forced to be closed by a ban that was not in place when they were opening. Attorneys representing the city have argued that since the businesses in question were illegal under federal law, they knew such a venture would be risky. Therefore, losing their money was always a possibility. The judge in the case agreed and ruled that losing money through a forced closure did not constitute irreparable injury. A regulation bill that was passed by the Colorado legislature last summer included the language that allows municipalities to prohibit medical marijuana businesses as long as the voters get to vote on the matter.
And that right there is the crux of the issue that's so frustrating, so troubling about medical marijuana, is that we would allow communities to vote as to whether or not patients in that community should have access to medicine. Can you imagine if we did that? Well, we got a problem with too many men using Viagra in the community. Let's allow the town to vote as to whether or not men can use Viagra or whether or not women can use birth control. Oh, wait a minute. They're trying to do that in some places, aren't they? This intrusion into people's personal lives, into their healthcare decisions, and this idea that we could settle that by a vote, it just seems ridiculous to me. And it once again shows why we need to regulate marijuana like alcohol, why we need to start the dominoes falling that recognize the personal use of marijuana for any reason is just a right that the federal government shouldn't be concerned with. It isn't something that cities should have the power to ban or not ban. We need to now regulate sensibly, sure, but when we're talking about people's access to medicine, especially in a state like Colorado where this is part of their constitution, it just seems unnecessarily cruel and prejudicial on the part of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Fort Drum is an Army base located in New York with about 13,000 residents of soldiers and their families, and additionally trains about 80,000 Army troops annually. With so many soldiers coming through the base, Fort Drum has decided to further their ban on so-called synthetic marijuana products. Soldiers in the Army, as well as other branches of the American military, already face disciplinary action if they are caught using or having a synthetic marijuana product in their possession. But as is typical around a large Army base like Fort Drum, there are many civilian businesses that rely on the support of the base for their business. Fort Drum was seeing a rise in the use of synthetic marijuana products among soldiers, so they have decided to reach out to the local businesses for help. Fort Drum set out notices to several businesses in the area that sell synthetic THC products, such as Spice or K2, and tell them that unless they take those products that are labeled herbal incense off of their shelves, their businesses are now off limits to the soldiers from the base. A spokesman for the Army base, Julie Cuppernall, says that the rise in use among the products in the military reflect the rise in use among civilian communities. She says that these particular drugs pose a special problem for the military. She said the documented health problems that the products can damage your kidneys and your heart, along with dulling down your mental faculties, interfere with being an effective soldier. She said the base had made one store off limit to soldiers about a year ago for refusing to pull the product, and she is giving the stores that sell the products now time to respond and remove the items before they publish the off-limits list for their soldiers so that businesses that remove the items will not receive any negative publicity. The FDA has banned some of the chemicals used in the products, but the makers of them just changed the formulas to stay ahead of the bans. New York State, in particular, has banned many of the chemicals as well. New York Senator Patty Ritchie is sponsoring legislation to ban any drug that mimics the effect of marijuana on the brain in an attempt to craft language that will stop legislators from continuing to ban the individual formulas of these popular products.
Oh, it's the same story. We've heard it before. Back in the 1920s, when we banned alcohol, people that were getting their beer that had been drinking just regular old beer were forced to turn to the prohibition-enabled profiteers, the moonshiners, who were making bathtub gin. They were making these questionable distilleries and all sorts of terrible things were happening to people, losing their eyesight from the poisoning from, badly distilled alcohol. The same kind of chemical arms race, if you will, exists now with the prohibition of marijuana. Here we prohibit something that in 5,000 years of human use has not had a single directly attributable death, where overdose on this is literally impossible, where it's not toxic to healthy cells and organs, where the worst of adverse consequences from it could be a mild bit of paranoia, a little bit of a racing heart. Some people get a cyclical vomiting syndrome, a very small percentage. But generally, the effects for most people are very pleasant. They enjoy the euphoria from it. And the worst side effects are bloodshot eyes, dry mouth, too much appreciation for noodly guitar solos, whatever it might be. But it's certainly nothing that compares to these effects that we're seeing from Spice and K2. And again, people are turning to those because of the ban on marijuana, because of the constant urine screening that catches marijuana over much more harmful drugs. Marijuana stays in your system much longer, and they're going to turn to the Spice and K2 to just try to relieve a little pressure in their lives, to have a little bit of fun here. And so we're forcing people, by our prohibition, we're turning them to something that is much more dangerous for them, much more dangerous for our society in general. And then, of course, they'll ban that chemical, and the chemist will tweak a molecule here and come up with a new chemical. And they'll ban that chemical, and the chemist will tweak a new chemical. And the drugs will get more potent, they'll get more dangerous, they'll get cheaper, they'll get more addictive. It always happens under prohibition. You cannot stop the laws of supply and demand. So why don't we just legalize the least harmful, most natural of the substances that people want to take in the first place?
Activists who are unhappy with the Redding, California City Council are planning to keep the pressure on during a rally tomorrow outside of Reading City Hall. Medical marijuana activists have been at odds with the city council over allowing what they are calling storefront collectives. The city had requested a court order to close the collectives in the city, and last Wednesday, Shasta County Superior Court Judge Stephen Bakers denied the city's request for that court order. Judge Baker's ruling cited the 4th District Court of Appeals decision in the city of Lake Forest versus Evergreen. That ruling struck down a dispensary ban in Lake Forest. Now the city council must decide if they will appeal that ruling. They have decided to take public comments in the first part of the city council meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Reading City Hall. Then the council will close the chambers to discuss the matter in private during a closed session, a plan that doesn't sit well with advocates and some of the collectives. Medical marijuana activists are asking people to come and rally in front of the closed session meeting to let city council know that the public wants more transparency and that they want the city council to leave the dispensaries and collectives alone. They are asking people to meet in front of the chambers at 5 p.m. Now, some collectives that breathed a sigh of relief after last Wednesday's ruling are distancing themselves from this event. The ruling was a big win for them last week, and they want to be cautious to try to work with the city council instead of against them. They're afraid of possibly sending the wrong message. But activists are hoping that many will come and bring signs asking the council to let the ruling lie and get on with more pressing city business. That rally again is planned for tomorrow at 5 p.m. at Reading City Hall. That's 777 Cypress Avenue.
I always wonder when we get to this discussion of dispensary bans and them not wanting this kind of stuff to go on, that I just wonder what's going on in the minds of these opponents. If they really think that, by God, this is terrible, and we'll just ban it, and then it won't happen anymore. As if the people who need this medicine won't be sick anymore, or they won't go somewhere or go to someone to get their medicine. It blows my mind every time I go into one of these clubs. I was up in Seattle this weekend. I got to see a cannabis farmers market. I've been to a number of the cannabis clubs here in Oregon. I've seen dispensaries in operation in California and Colorado. And every time I'm in one of them, that thought comes to my mind of, wow, what a whole bunch of crime this is. Yeah, look at this crime over here. The felonies going on. Right over here. It's so mundane and boring and just American commerce at its best. Never do I feel threatened or worried or any danger except for the thought of the government coming in and applying some violence or threats or danger. But the people in there are enjoying themselves. They're engaged in honest barter and trade, whatever you want to call it. You know, marijuana walks in, money walks in, marijuana walks out. I don't care what it's called. There's nothing to fear from it. And I just wonder if these opponents, when they look at that, why they see a danger, why they see a problem, and how they can imagine that making that go away means that it's going to disappear. No, it's going to go to the parks. It's going to go to the parking lots. It's going to go to people's basements. It's going to get shadier. There's going to be more crime involved. There's going to be less protection for patients involved. I would think out in the open, available for inspection and regulation with nothing to hide would be the way we'd want to go on these issues. All right, thanks, Carrie, for the news. I got a couple of other updates here from our hemp headlines. One, speaking of Seattle, I was in Seattle this weekend, as was Governor Gary Johnson. He spoke to us on Friday as he was making his way to Seattle. And this is just announced from the Seattle Times today. Libertarian presidential candidate endorses Washington's marijuana legalization measure. This is a former New Mexican Governor Gary Johnson, the Republican who's running for president under the Libertarian Party, called I-502, quote, fiscally responsible and socially pragmatic, end quote, in a statement sent out by the initiative campaign. He also said, quote, we should regulate and tax it like alcohol and tobacco instead of propping up black market profiteers, Johnson explained. He also expressed concern about the thousands of marijuana arrests that occur every year. We have better uses for our police, our courts, and our jails. So there's one candidate on the campaign trail who's endorsing I-502 directly, Libertarian candidate Governor Gary Johnson at GaryJohnson2012.org. Also in the political news, we have information coming here from the Washington Post, and this is a In the Loop column written by Emily Heil. And I love the opening of this, of course. She says, here's a radical proposal for Mitt Romney. If he wants to pick up the much-coveted support of Ron Paul's energized and organized army, the best way to their hearts might be through marijuana. And then it expresses how there's a big support now growing, how Pat Robertson has endorsed the legalization of marijuana, and how among Republicans this is a growing, actually a growing part of the Republican Party that believes in legalization. Also points to Colorado as a swing state where legalization could help Romney. So I can't believe it. We get to have these discussions. We get presidential candidates being asked about legalization. We got 2 states that are pushing it in 2012. I'm telling you, it's a good year to be here. Be back right after this.
It's 20 after the hour, and we have to take a short break, if you know what I mean. Please support these sponsors who support NORML Show Live.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would say to South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGA Genetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAGenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
Oh, I could have smoked that pot.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Will. I don't work at a used record store. I don't own an iguana, although I'm sure they make great pets. I don't have dreadlocks or play the acoustic guitar. I can remember quite well, thank you, and no, I don't constantly have the munchies. When 420 comes around, I've still got 40 minutes of work left. I've never hit a girl on a bike with my car or shot my friend with a shotgun. I've never had to apologize for letting a girl I was watching drown in a pool while I was getting high because, duh, I wouldn't be getting high if I was around children. I'm a regular guy who works regular jobs, just like the majority of all Americans who use marijuana occasionally and responsibly. My name is Will, and I'm normal.
It's time for your daily Toker Tunes, the best in 420 friendly music from all genres that uplifts, entertains, and informs the public. Today we bring you tunes for Roots Monday, our celebration of the music that evolved into the popular modern music of today. We pick the best of blues, country, folk, and jazz with a 420 feel and serve it up for you every Monday. If you'd like to submit your song to be played on NORML Show Live, send it to us at stash@normal.org. Now here's some more great independent marijuana music for today's Daily Toker Tunes.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we get into the Toker Tunes and our new Roots Monday editor, I did want to make mention of freemybabies.org. This is something the NORML Women's Alliance is definitely put out on the front page of NORML.org today, talking about Daisy Bram and her husband, the 2 children that were ripped from her arms, one 3-week-old, one 15-month-old. They are legal medical marijuana patients, and despite that, Butte County doing a compliance check went in after them. So you can get more information at our NORML blog. NORML Women's Alliance is all a part of it as well on the facebook.com/NORMLwomen, twitter.com/NORMLwomen. And again, freemybabies.org if you'd like to get involved and spread the word about Daisy Bram. They are trying to shut down the DA's phone numbers on this Wednesday at 10 a.m. I believe they'll have more information about that up at the website. So check it out, freemybabies.org. All right, let me get into Roots Monday today. As I mentioned earlier, I had made the call out to see if we get some auditions, some people to try out the Roots Monday position here. And here's our first auditioner. We turn the mic over here to Diamond Dale Rio for your Roots Monday.
I'm Diamond Dale Rio. Hey, thanks for tuning in to today's Daily Toker Tune on Roots Monday. We're going to tune in today to a self-taught classical guitarist from Farmington, Michigan, Melvin Chenault. Melvin Chenault learned how to play and transpose Bach, Chopin, and Mozart while still in middle school. He began playing the upright bass, but after seeing the movie Crossroads, wanted to play the guitar. Melvin cites jazz bassist Stanley Clarke with awakening him to the beauty and the sound of a masterfully played acoustic stringed instrument. Melvin's song Serial Drama, which we can all think about the drama, we're going through trying to get the laws changed in this country. Now here's Serial Drama.
everybody. It's Wiz Kaliko from the Ivory Island Hour, which comes to you live every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Pacific on the NORML Network. I just wanted to let you know that two of my favorite bands are teaming up to spread good vibes across the land and are headed to a venue near you. Revolution is heading out on the second leg of their tour in support of the release of their new triple album, Peace of Mind, which includes full-length acoustic and dub versions. They'll also be joined by our boys from the land of Aloha, The Green. We're also promoting the recent release of their latest album, Ways and Means. You can check out a full list of shows, get the latest swag, and most importantly, find their music at revolutionmusic.com and thegreen808.com. Don't miss this amazing tour. I promise you, after these shows, you'll have peace of mind.
We are each of us a multitude.
Wow, I'm suddenly feeling wasly fungible.
There isn't the sharp line dividing humans.
Or maybe fungibly wuzzy.
It's a very wuzzy line. It's a very wuzzy line. It's getting wuzzier all the time.
Sometimes it's hard to tell.
We find animals doing things that we, in our arrogance, used to think.
NORML, unlike any other marijuana or drug reform organization, is built from the ground up by grassroots activists. We are the Marijuana Smokers Lobby, and we aren't just anti-prohibition, we're pro-marijuana. Every week, we take some time to talk to the citizens of local NORML chapters across the country and around the world, as well as others who are working to make a difference in the fight to end adult marijuana prohibition. In this segment, we call Grassroots Activism. All right, welcome back, 31 after the hour. And like we mentioned earlier, I was out at the Baker Institute in Houston, Texas, as a part of a drug war panel, or forum, I guess it was, entitled "The War on Drugs Has Failed. Is Legalization the Answer?" And one very moving part of the forum was a video by Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Era of Colorblindness. We've referred to it in the past, of course, the vast racial disparity in marijuana arrests and drug war arrests in general being used to keep kind of a Jim Crow society in place. So to speak on that topic, also at the forum, was the Reverend Edwin C. Sanders II, the senior servant at the Metropolitan Interdenominational Church in Nashville, Tennessee, who works, directly with the people impacted by the war on drugs. I thought his speech was so compelling that I wanted to bring it to you today. So please enjoy this from the Baker Institute. This is the Reverend Sanders.
Thank you. It was hard not to stand up and applaud after listening and watching the video, because indeed, Michelle Alexander has become just a vital voice in this movement that I think we are going to spend some more time talking about today. And hopefully not just we'll talk about, but we'll find this experience being one that will translate into a new level of activism on all of our parts. There are a few things I want to say very quickly about what I've been doing in this regard over some time. There is an organization called Religious Leaders for a More Just and Compassionate Drug Policy. A number of years ago, we were blessed to have Howard Moody, who was one of the pioneers in this area, who actually developed the organization called Religious Leaders for a More Just and Compassionate Drug Policy. What Howard Moody did was he actually effectively went into the theological faith community around this country and was able to get a number of the leading voices in the United States to become a part of this whole agenda of trying to develop a new perspective for clergy persons in the United States and beyond. One of the things, though, that you look at the organization as, and I was blessed that Howard at some point decided it was okay to hand it over to Ed Sanders. And it was interesting to me because he had put together this phenomenal group of people who were a part of, I think, the foundation of helping us from a theological perspective talk about this issue. But one of the things I realized when I inherited what Howard had done is that Howard got all the superstars Howard had all the people who were distinguished professors. He had all the people who served the major congregations. I always tell people, my good friend Will Campbell says there are three kinds of churches. He says there are high steeple churches, there are low steeple churches, and there are no steeple churches. And Howard got all the high steeple churches. And he had people whose names you would easily recognize. But yet there was a way in which we realized as we began to go forward with this movement that indeed to be effective in doing this work, there was a way in which we had to begin to make sure that there were people in the low steeple churches and the no steeple churches, or the low steeple churches, to be able to hear and to understand how important it was for us to be engaged in this movement. I appreciate that, and I give you that perspective because one of the things I think has to happen to take this next step is how we engage, how we involve, how we create an atmosphere in which those persons who are serving congregations that might not end up being the ones that fall into the categories of being the mega churches or the churches that are of mainline significance around in theological circles, but rather the church that's the church on the corner, the church that has only 100 or maybe less members, the church that ends up serving in terms of socioeconomic terms, that end up serving the people that probably most reflect those who end up being victimized by mass incarceration. You do need to understand that the more money you have, the more likely you are to be able to avoid that trap. But the people who end up very often populating no steeple churches do not have the resource. They end up being put in the position of being subject to the ways in which the criminal justice system, or the criminal injustice system, as I prefer to call it sometimes, ends up meting out a kind of response to who they are in a way that relegates them to being victims in this mass incarceration. There's a language that Michelle Alexander uses in this presentation today that I want to suggest to you is a very important language, because she says that what is necessary is a confrontation with the truth. I think it's very important that she was forthright and honest enough to speak clearly to the fact that this was something that she had to come to almost in terms of a personal epiphany. It wasn't something that she easily understood at first. And I want to suggest to you that many of you in this room probably don't understand, I'm convinced, of some of the dimensions of this problem that are going to have to be addressed and embraced if indeed we're going to be able to take it to the point where indeed we put an end to this insanity that is actually being visited upon the communities that many of us can identify intellectually, understand statistically, in some instances have some involvement with personally, but the real reality is that in most instances, those communities are isolated and those communities are not easily understood by most of us in this room. We need to talk about that because that's a community that we have to partner with. That's a community that we have to move into relationship with. That's a community that we'll have to line up with as we go forward in this struggle. And I want to try to say some things about what I think that means and what the implications are for us. It's not as though what Michelle Alexander is talking about is not something that we have not seen bits and pieces of over time. I think that I appreciate it. I often say this when I talk. I never assume that I'm really saying things to people that they have not heard or that they don't know. But rather it's a way in which you arrange the facts and you put the information together in a way that might lead to a different kind of understanding, might even translate into a personal awakening when you realize that it's something that is other than the bits and the pieces of what seem to be a problem, and you come to realize it's a part of a fabric that has a history, a part of a fabric that has been woven over the entire experience of black people and other people of color in this country. It's not as though this has transpired just since the drug war started. The drug war just ends up being the point at which there's a galvanization. There's a point at which there's a coming together of a reality that represents a historical horror that goes back at least 400 years. And you cannot understand what's going on unless you're honest enough to face forthrightly and appreciate that that's exactly what it is. It is the new Jim Crow. But the new Jim Crow, you have to understand, is built upon what was as a reference to the old Jim Crow. But the old Jim Crow existed because of 300 years of social disenfranchisement and the ways in which the reality of disinheritance had been a part of those people of color, especially those of African descent in this country. So I want to suggest to you that one of the things you have to do is be willing to forthrightly deal with the issue of race. And what I find to be very problematic in that regard is that most of us, because we know that we are a part of this activity, we are a part of this movement that we can see as being right and being about something that needs to be addressed, I think we can feel good about the fact that we have somehow come to the point where we see the problem and know that something has to be done about it. But it's much harder when you realize, and I will quote that great philosopher of the 20th century who just went on to glory not too long ago. As a matter of fact, I was at a DPA meeting the day it happened, and that is the great Michael Jackson, who said that it does not work until you're willing to look forthrightly at the man in the mirror. Because very often what we appreciate is that what continues to fuel and perpetuate this problem is something that all of us end up being involved in and involved with. I'm especially appreciative of, anybody United Methodists in here? Good. I'm especially appreciative that evidently Michelle Alexander rung your bell in a way that just recently the United Methodist Church divested itself completely of all stock that had to do in the prison industrial complex. Okay? And for them, that was millions of dollars because their pension plans and the like. But what would it mean for all of us in this room to go and examine our 401ks? And see the degree to which some of the investments that allow you to be able to have some sense of security in retirement end up being a part of what's driving this system. What happens if you go to your Southern Baptist church? What happens if you go to your Presbyterian, your Episcopalian church? What happens if you go? You understand what I'm saying? There's a way in which we all can play a part in this, but to some degree you have to look at the person in the mirror. Racism has taken such a different turn and a different shape in modern society. You have to understand what institutional, systemic, and structural racism is. Institutional, systemic, and structural racism are the things that drive this prison industrial complex. Institutional, systemic, and structural racism are the things that continue to allow this horror to be advanced and to actually end up taking on new dimensions beyond anything we can begin to understand. What has happened over time, especially with this mentality that has turned into the fiscal assessment of the value of humanity. The fiscal assessment of a value, put a fiscal assessment of the value of human life into the equation. You have to go back to slavery and understand that as a matter of fact, the people who came here of African ancestry are people who were indeed valued in fiscal terms. So there's a way in which it's not just true, though, of African Americans. It's really true of all people, that who you are is often assessed in terms of what you are worth. And what you are worth will determine, and what is that driven by? Very often it's driven by opportunities for education. Very often it's driven by having been in a line of ancestry which allows you to have multi-generational wealth. What that ends up meaning is that you end up being a part of a reality where there is privilege just simply because of the color of your skin. What you have to realize is that that's a part of something that if you deal with it forthrightly, you have to try it, see if it works. Okay? Yeah, but do it with your hand. I come from a faith tradition where we kind of act out stuff, all right, So every now and then, because when you're at home by yourself and you're thinking about these issues critically and trying to figure out how you're going to respond, you might just all by yourself need to say, because in many instances it does end up being about who we are that continues to perpetuate this situation. There's a great book that was written in the late 1960s, which is entitled The Choice, written by a gentleman named Samuel Yett. And one of the things that Samuel Yett talks about in that book, and it's really interesting to see how this has evolved into one of the realities of our day, is he says the last thing you want to do is end up being obsolete in this society. If there's any way in which, and that's what Michelle Alexander is talking about when she talks about becoming obsolete, when she talks about getting to the place where you no longer fit into the system of employment. You no longer fit into the framework and the construct by which people are able to earn their living. Then you end up being vulnerable in a way that allows you to almost be seen as obsolete. Another book, I'll tell you, go back and find that old book. I don't know if you remember this one, Ethan. It was They Kill Horses, Don't They? They Kill Horses, Don't They? It's the title of it. What is it? They shoot horses. I always say they shoot horses, don't they? But it's a great book because it just talks about what happens in this society when you become obsolete. When you're no longer of any value to what drives the engine of the economy, then there's a way in which you find yourself being relegated to a place where the possibility for genocidal assault upon you and those like you becomes a very significant one. I want to suggest to you that you have to appreciate that as being a truism that is scary in terms of what its full implication might be. Because what that means is that when you come to that place, now, this is kind of interesting in terms of what's happened with mass incarceration, because it does seem like for a while there was a point where we were starting to see some decline just simply in terms of numbers of African American, and particularly African American men. But all of a sudden, as that decline is occurring, it's like somebody figured out how to quantify once again the value of African American men and developed a new system by which they could become a part of what drives that engine. I call it mining black gold. Mining black gold. Because black gold is being mined in our communities every day. Because each one of those young men that goes into prison ends up representing at least $30,000 a year to that engine. Those young men who end up being incarcerated end up being the fuel that allows that engine to continue to turn. And whether you appreciate it or know it or not, many of us end up unwittingly being a part of it. Being a part of it because of systemic, institutional, and structural racism. We need to study and understand that, because there's a way in which process, there's a way in which procedure, there's a way in which order, as we know it, civil order, there's a way in which the legal system has been designed and operates. All you got to do is go downtown to your courthouse and try to figure out why it is that it's hard to find a white person there who's not a lawyer. Okay? It's something that you have to face. And you don't begin to deal with this problem unless you deal with it totally, unless you deal with it forthrightly. I want to suggest to you, and let me be very clear, unequivocally, when you ask me to come and preach, I tell people all the time, come and speak. I don't care if you ask for a lecture, I don't care if you ask for, a seminar, whatever you ask for, you're going to get a sermon. All right? All right? Because that's basically all I know how to do. So I'm going to quote somebody to you. I'm going to quote one of my young Jewish friends. One of my young Jewish friends who I hold very dear to my heart. As a matter of fact, I usually don't go through a day without having a conversation with him. Now, I want to just tell you something he said. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to who? The poor. This is just my, just a young Jewish rabbi, who I'm convinced is my ace buddy. To bring good news to the poor. Sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and let the oppressed go free. Now, anybody who dares to say that they are a partner, he's just my young rabbi friend. It doesn't make any difference what other faith tradition you're in. It doesn't make any difference if your faith tradition is you're a Buddhist. It doesn't make any difference if you're a Muslim. It doesn't make any difference, obviously, if you're in the Judeo-Christian tradition or any other. There are some truths that are hard to escape in terms of what it is that we are called to do, if indeed we are to be the people who are going to take up the responsibility of justice, to take up the responsibility of equality, to take up the responsibility of doing that which is right and fair. And when you take that responsibility, what I'm saying is that you don't set it over here and say, this is who I am as a religious person or a spiritual person, and this is who I am as a person in the civil world. It's one fabric. And I think it's until we see that. But there has to be some basis. There has to be some foundation. There has to be some rubric of logic. There has to be some sense of who you are that allows you to be able to see yourself in relationship to who everyone else is. It's a point at which you come to the awareness that who we are is very much connected in a fashion that is inseparable, it's undeniable, it's unavoidable. You can't get away from it. And there's a way in which even when you think you do, and when you decide that there's another human being that does not merit, does not deserve, or does not fit into your equation of understanding, it automatically ends up being a part of your own internalized demise. Because you find yourself at that point having diminished your personhood by the way in which you end up diminishing the personhood of another. So what I'm saying to you is that this mass incarceration, this prison industrial complex, is something bigger really than just involving the black men and the other men and women of color who are being victimized by it. It becomes something that eats at the heart of the humanity of all of us. Of all of us. You see? It's not just it's not just the slave that has to be set free. It's the owner that has to be set free. It's not just those who are at the bottom of the scale who end up being the black gold. It ends up being the ones who drive and turn the engine and profit from it. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand why perhaps there are so many other things that are creeping. When I think of it in biomedical terms, I think of it in terms of the way in which syphilis represents itself. Houston is one of those cities, by the way, that has syphilis rates that continue very often to fluctuate and to spiral. And public health officials have discovered that if you have incidents of syphilis in your community, that the overall health status of your community is definitely going to be determined to be low. What I'm saying to you is that if you find yourself being a part of a community where this dynamic that we're talking about, that Michelle Alexander is talking about, that I'm trying to share another perspective with you about, is that when you see this as something that's going on in your community, it says something about the overall condition of the quality of life, not just in the inner city, not just in the communities of those who are the disinherited and the dispossessed and the oppressed, the beat down, the kept down, the held down. You know what I'm talking about. The folks who very often just easily you allow to see get paraded off into the prisons without any reaction because somehow that doesn't seem to be who you are. What I'm saying to you is that when that goes on, it affects what's going on in your suburbs. It affects what's going on in your communities that end up being the places of the elite, the rich, and the successful. So, Michelle Alexander ends her talk by saying that one of the things that has to happen is that it has to be a movement. And one of the things I have come to appreciate about a movement is that ultimately it has to be driven by something other than what's theoretical. It has to be driven by something more than something that is intellectual. It has to be driven by something more than that which ends up being the byproduct of what can be, what you might be able to begin to try to wrap your mind around. There's a point at which for this to happen is a way in which it has to become part of where your heart is. Of where your heart is. I'm a great fan of the writings of Howard Thurman, and he talks in his autobiography about this whole business of head and heart. You know, how you get these two things to work together. It's one thing to have all the information, have all the knowledge. It's one thing to be able to look and be able to analyze and to be able to critique and to be able to. We've seen a lot of analysis today. We've heard a lot of statistics today. We've heard a lot today that would seemingly lend itself to what I think is a very rich and a good and wholesome debate. But how you translate that into a movement is when you come to see yourself as being intricately a part of it. Not that you're doing something for somebody else, but rather that you're doing it for yourself and for your community as well. It's not just somebody else's child. You have to understand it has to be a sense in which you have a level of kinship. You have to have a level of ownership. You have to have a level of relationship to those persons who end up being a part of that pipeline. Think of how sinister this thing is. I'm amazed by statistics that just run by us and it doesn't hurt. To me, it's painful to hear that these prison industrial systems, these corporations that have been developed around prisons, that when they do their demographic studies, that they go into our communities and look at the reading level rates of children in the 3rd and 4th grade to determine where they should build a prison. That's sinister, okay? That borders upon what in my language is downright evil, right? And there's a way in which it's happening every day. And we sit by and treat it like, well, that's not me. Yeah, well, it is. because it ends up being a part of what paves our roads. It ends up being a part of what allows the infrastructure. It's like going into South Africa. And I tell people all the time, I go to South Africa sometime and I think to myself, I could live here. And then I think twice and I say, of course I could live here, because they had 45, how many years of free labor to build highways and to put sewers and water systems in. The fact is, don't ever make the mistake of thinking that the foundation of America is built upon the free labor of the same people who are the victims of this prison industrial complex. You can't get it right. You can't get it right unless you deal with the truth. You see, one of the problems we run into is that our history keeps on interrupting our present. You know, we're moving along thinking that we're doing all right, that we're progressing and that things are better. But then your history jumps up and smacks you in the face. You know, your history comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, I haven't gone anywhere. You know, I'm still the factor that's haunting you. I'm still the force that's threatening you. I'm still the thing that you cannot sleep at night because your own sense of fear that is born out of really a kind of guilt that you have to figure out how you're doing. All I'm saying to you today is we're looking for a movement. And I hope that when we leave here today, we don't just leave here feeling like we're more well-informed. We don't leave here just feeling like, well, we have more information than we had before. We don't just leave here feeling like, yeah, I can go out and be involved in the debate in a new way. There's a way in which you have to say, it means I've got to go out and involve myself in this. Now, some people would say, because I know who's in this room, some people would say that what we're doing here today is preaching to the choir. I've been a pastor for a long time. And one of the things I had discovered as a pastor is that it is critical to preach to the choir periodically. Because you see, sometimes the choir thinks that they're running the show. The choir thinks that the reason why it's going on is because of who they are. But I'm telling you, you have to change that, because you have to realize that if indeed who you are is not intricately connected to the people, the they, okay, who are part of this horror that's being visited upon us, then the movement does not happen. It happens in a way where it's not about whether or not Open Society Institute gives you a grant and you become a Soros fella. It's not because it's not going to happen if you wait until you get some support from. I tell people all the time, I'm so glad that the civil rights movement was not dependent upon whether or not Ford, Rockefeller, or any other foundation funded it before it happened. If you had waited on it until you had funded, it would not have happened, right? There's a way in which there's already enough resource. It's a matter of what we decide to do. Where's the priority? You know, I'll tell you this one last thing. Go to, and especially for those of you in churches, because I mean, obviously I have a thing, you know, with churches, but go to your church. I love that thing that you learn about boards, where they say it doesn't make any difference. You know, you've done your, you've done your strategic plan, and you've got that beautiful statement about who you are. I love it when they say about boards, they say, if you want to understand what an organization is, don't look at their mission, look at their budget. Okay? So how much do you invest in trying to make the change that we're looking for? How much do you put out of the resource that you have the ability to control? How do you deal with that? Because it's all a part of how we begin to change this madness that we're in. So we're talking about a movement. And, you know, I have tons of pages of notes here that I probably, you know, I've skipped over a lot of. But I assured Bill that when I started that I would stop within 30 minutes so that there could be maybe some dialogue and some interaction. A minute? No. Not really. Got to stay on it. Okay. Maybe we're not going to get to say anything. Well, you know, I'm used to that. Matter of fact, preachers kind of like it because people can't talk back sometimes. But anyway. But actually, I go out of my way to provide opportunities for people to talk back in the midst of it, because there's a way in which there is a conversation that has to go on. We're working with a group of people here, a couple of representatives, Mama over there, okay, Sister Hope over here. There are a number of people in the city of Houston right now that we're involved with in terms of trying to create a new level of conversation around. We're talking about HIV and AIDS. This is. Let me just end on this point. You all need to get this. If you do this right, this is why you should be excited about this movement. If we do this right in terms of the issues that are related to drug policy, it will allow us the opportunity to deal not just with the issue of substance abuse and drugs and the whole business of mass incarceration. If we do it right, we'll deal with all of the social issues that haunt and systematically undermine the potential of the possibilities in our society. Because you're not going to get it right if you don't deal with jobs. You're not going to get it right if you don't deal with education. You're not going to get it right if you don't deal with access to health care. You know what I'm saying? To get it right, you're going to deal with the larger fabric of the issue in a way that should have a transformative effect on the totality of the community. See, I get excited about it on that level. That's why we're here doing this thing around HIV and AIDS, because you realize that, you know, the same people end up being the ones who are disproportionately impacted. The same people end up being the ones who end up carrying the social burden. The same people are the ones who end up being every day haunted by this insidious, mean-spirited, sinister reality that lives in our midst. All of us live in the midst of it. And we need to appreciate that if we're going to bring about a day when indeed we don't have to have that perpetual sense of dis-ease because of what's transpiring in our midst, it will be when all of us realize that all of us are a part of what causes the dis-ease, and that all of us have to take a part in seeing to it that we bring it to an end.
That is one of the best presentations I've ever had the joy of watching. Reverend Edwin C. Sanders II. The entire presentation is available on YouTube at the Baker Institute's page, youtube.com/Baker Institute. I encourage you to spread that around because it is a very important dialogue we need to have here on race and racism in the drug war. And as we go into hour 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and take your calls at 971-533-7111. So for Cannabis Carrie and Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us for hour 1. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Take it on one more time. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.
You're listening to the NORML Network.